If you think about it very carefully, when you act or think that there's a limited amount of resources available to you, you're actually suggesting that Allah only has a limited amount to give.
So today, Pillars has, I think, 500,000?
No, it's we're over 1 million now.
Over 1 million?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Because I think generally people weren't very happy with the experience with most prayer apps that existed at the time. Ads, 6 months, and something that affects so many millions of Muslims. And I was surprised that no one had really gone into the market and thought, let's do something about this.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Abdul Rahman Abbas, the founder and the CEO of the Pillars app, a privacy-focused prayer app used by over 1 million Muslims around the world today. He shared with us their runaway success, how they were inspired by the data leak of another massive Muslim prayer app, and they actually launched this startup alongside their day jobs as a full-time doctor. He talks about the problems that plague Muslims and entrepreneurs in general in the UK, and a scarcity mindset that doesn't exist out in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and what can be done to counter that. And finally, we discussed whether or not you should accept venture capital funding. As always, I'm your host, Arib Siddiqui, and this is Muslim Money Talk. Before we begin, we actually noticed only about 10% of you are subscribed to the podcast. So if you like what you're listening to and you want to hear more from us and see more things Muslim and money related, then please consider subscribing and, of course, leaving this episode a like and share it with your friends, leave us a comment or a review, because it really, really does help us out and help more people to find us. Thank you. Now back to the show. Bro, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the podcast. It's been genuinely a very long time coming. You were one of the, when we made a list of all of the people we wanted on, you were there, right there at the top, followed by Ali Abdal. And then, but yeah, we'd love to, there's a lot I think we can talk about. So thank you.
I'm pretty surprised at that.
Well, I might be being generous, but yeah, there you go. But yeah, thank you. So I think there's so much we can talk about, bro. I think you are somewhat of a community leader, I think,
You're being very, very nice.
In the UK tech bros Muslim sphere, I think. Mashallah, I've loved your journey, followed what you've done since after COVID. I just wanted to come on and just ask you ultimately how you did it. But starting with the initial question of what was the inspiration behind Pillars?
So Pillars came out of a necessity. I mean, it's worth saying that I've been doing startups, or at least very small niche startups before that. And some of them did okay, some didn't do so well. So Pillars wasn't my first thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think people often, generally in the startup world, you hear about the thing that they got successful from, right? So you don't hear about that pre-journey. So I like to start out by saying that because I feel like a lot of people are scared about making the first step. They think they've got to make it from
Of course.
But yeah, Pillars came out of a necessity. It was during, I think it was 5th year of my medical school. 3 years ago now. Essentially, we'd heard about Muslim Pro. I think there are 140 million users. And this app had done the rounds on social media because Vice News had released an article saying that they'd sold their data to a third party, and that data had ended up with people who may not have our best interests at heart, let's just say.
I think it was the US military, right?
Yeah. They'd sold the data to this data broker. It ended up in the hands of the US military, I think the equivalent of the Ministry of Defense, the Pentagon in the US. And people were really upset. You had people like Omar Suleiman from Fiqh Institute go on social media and it was basically a trending topic that day.
Gosh.
And probably for the few weeks after, and it was covered by a different news outlet. So that happened, and I mean that's kind of more, I would say, the feather that broke the camel's back, because I think generally people weren't very happy with the experience with most prayer apps that existed at the time. Ads, often inappropriate ads like gambling or even like games with an element of nudity. The privacy stuff obviously tipped things over the edge, but there was also just the janky user experience.
Yeah.
And you know what? It was funny because when that happened, group chats were obviously talking about this, and I was talking to friends about, at the time, they were like, we need to do something about it. But actually for about 6 months, nothing happened.
So this was 2021?
This is November 2021, I think, is when it first broke out, yeah.
Okay.
If I remember that date correctly. 6 months or so, or maybe a bit less than 6 months, there was nothing really that was done. I spoke to a friend at the time, Tariq. He was a mathematical computational student at UCL. I was a medical student. And we'd always intended to work together on something. And he popped up. We'd already said, let's do something about this, but we both got quite busy. And then he popped up to me, I think around March, April time, the year after. And he said to me, let's do it. I've got some time. Let's build a solution. And nothing, I emphasize that nothing had happened at that point, because 6 months and something that affects so many millions of Muslims. And I was surprised that no one had really gone into the market and thought, let's do something about this, considering how much of a pain point it had become. And yeah, we decided, let's do it. And we honestly did it from a community project perspective of.
Yeah, because you're famous for building in public.
I'm famous of it because of that. And the funny thing is that I never used to I used to be one of those people who was like stealth.
Stealth mode, don't tell anyone, someone might copy this.
It's really silly in hindsight. Now that I've been in the startup journey for this long, it's something that is very, even when you go to the Bay Area, people kind of laugh at that, at the idea of you keeping your ideas to yourself, because everyone knows it's all about execution. It's not about what idea you have.
Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about how you actually make it come to life.
Exactly. And so I was one of those people. And the only reason why I broke that rule of being stealth, being quiet, is because I thought of it as a community project. The end goal of it was to be open sourced. So you're going to keep stealth if you're going to open source this project, right? Open source, obviously, meaning that you're going to put it up on the internet for anyone else to use or build upon it. So that was the only reason why I did it. And it was off the back of doing that, of sharing the progress in public, of the process of, it was just my sketch designs that I was putting up on social media, on Twitter, of like, what would the prayer page look like? What would the widget look like? And that got people really interested. People really liked the designs. People started weighing in on it. I think at the time I really took advantage of like Twitter's interactive tools like votes and polls, and got people to kind of almost be part of the decision-making process. They were part of the decision-making process, and people felt bought in. I felt into the project, especially given what had happened. It felt like a community effort. I'd like to think anyway.
So people really cared about the privacy angle. Like, oh my God, this app that we trust with something so sacred to us, our prayers, they've been selling our location data to people who might be using it for all kinds of purposes. So they really cared about that.
I think that is like a trigger, because I think at the time it's on people's memories and everyone's feeling on edge. I'll be honest, as time goes on, people forget. So unfortunately, that becomes less and less of an angle. I think what we said is like there's like 3 or 4 main things that we think people like pillars for, and based on what people tell us. And privacy is definitely one of them. I think the other aspects that were Muslim made, not all the prayer apps or even the Quran apps that people download, people may not know this, but a lot of them are not made by Muslims. There's the other aspect of the design. People really liked the design. They felt it was very clean, very minimalistic. I'm trying to say what people said about me rather than complimenting myself. The ad-free aspects, right? Yeah. From the get-go, you're not paying for premium to get rid of ads. We don't have ads. That's a promise we make. That's something we're going to keep. Those were the kind of main, reason, the privacy focus, no ads, Muslim-made, beautiful design, that I think thing. And if I were to categorize them, I'd say the no ads and the design were kind of the top things.
Yes.
But I think privacy at the time was something that at least created a shift of people to reconsider. But I wouldn't say today that's one of the, unfortunately, it's not one of those. Unfortunately, selling data is the sort of thing that people only really think about it when it happens to them. And when it doesn't, they're not really thinking about it. But it's obviously a core tenet of,
I guess when it becomes like a massive news story and you've got like Sheikh Umar Sulaiman talking about it, then everyone's like, oh my God, let's think about this. Because 140 million users globally is nothing to sneeze at, but it must have impacted a certain core market of them for them to go to you guys. So today, Pillars has, I think, 500,000?
No, it's we're over 1 million now.
Over 1 million?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we've really grown. I mean, it's a function of time, right?
Yeah.
if you exist for long enough, you'll keep racking up the users, and that will keep growing.
It's not just a function of time, it's a function of quality and hard work and really, really pushing that.
Yeah,
I think it's a testament to you guys and the team. So there's plenty of people who've been out there for a long time and they weren't see users just coming to them organically.
Alhamdulillah, like yeah. I mean, I think once you get the core thing right of build something that people want. If you tick that box, then the rest of it sends to snowball.
Sure.
You can obviously augment it with marketing, whether it's paid or organic marketing.
Yeah.
But the core concept is that people, I mean, that's something I hear a lot is, and it makes me really happy, is that people who when I meet them, say to me things like, I've told my whole family and friends to get into Pillars. So that idea that they love the product so much and they're willing to go out of their way and tell people to download them, and they almost wear it as a badge of honor, makes me obviously feel like that's how I feel about using, I mean, I don't want to mention, but when I feel like I love a product, that's what I end up doing. I end up going and preaching it to all my friends around me because I love it so much. And so if the people feeling that way about me, it makes me feel happy that we A, built something good, and B, that it means that there's some sort of organic growth element, that people are just talking. We don't actually do that much marketing, actually, I would say.
What's crazy to me is the first time I felt like, okay, these guys are really doing something, is I went to the Bay Area, I think in 2022.
Okay.
And I've got family there, and I was there for work, and I was just staying with them. And it came the time for Salah, and then I saw the notifications pop up on people's phones, and it was Pillars.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God.
That was your first time?
No, I knew about Pillars from the UK. Time. I didn't know people in America were using it, right?
Yeah.
And I asked them, how did they hear about it? And they just said, so my cousin who was in New York, he was just like, yeah, people in New York were using it. So, you know, that's how I found out about it. And independently, my other cousin who's studying in LA, you know, she had it, right, as well. So then these communities, I guess, for you, am I right in saying Twitter has been a great distribution channel?
I think it was definitely the catalyst, at least at the start, that got things going. I mean, when we first launched, by building in public. And from that, and those tweets going somewhat viral, semi-viral, that got us, I think in the first weekend, we had 10 to 15,000 downloads.
Wow.
Just in the first weekend of launching. And that was all Twitter. So that was from viral. I think what the first tweet that went viral was the widget screenshot of our widget design, and yeah, so that is definitely, and I'm a big fan of building in public. I really encourage it, and having seen what it's done for me, it's kind of feels stupid not to do it with regards to any project. I'm a very anti-stealth. Very few startups where stealth mode is that key. Usually, I think that if you build in public, you get potential feedback ASAP. I mean, the whole idea of like people always say in the startup world, right? Talk to your customers. If you don't want to talk to your customers one by one, at least put it on social media and get them to reply to you on tweets or DM you about it. I mean, that's a great way to get some initial early feedback without having to even build a product, right? People are often saying to me, how can I build out this app idea? I've got a website idea. It's like, just do it on Figma. Most people can get Figma and work out how to use it, or Sketch, which is what I use, and they can go and share it and get feedback. And then if you're lucky and people like it, maybe you only get feedback to say that this doesn't quite do much.
Yeah, for sure.
But eventually you might get feedback that says, this is really good, and you see that in the function of retweets and likes.
So for people who don't know, Figma and Sketch are basically design apps where you can build an application, basically screens that look and feel like an app, but people can click through it, so they get basically some semblance of the user experience.
And they're getting more and more powerful in the sense that you can prototype them. They can almost feel like the actual app. Obviously, we know they're not going to function, but you can get them so that if someone presses something, it goes to this page.
Absolutely.
And if you can get that up and running, and that is a weekend of work. Then you can get a very quick idea of whether something's working.
We use it all the time at Kestrl. For everyone who came to MTF, it was a big Figma on the big touchscreen, not the real app that people were using.
Oh, really?
No, but it can really do the job and get some really, really good feedback from it. So I'm a big advocate for it. Let's rewind a little bit, because you always struck me as sort of a doctor by day, founder by night type person. Are you still a practicing doctor, or have you gone full time?
I was practicing for up until 2 months ago.
Okay.
Now I'm full time on tech.
Wow.
Pillars and another thing that I'm working on.
Which
Jibreel.
we'll come on to that.
And so that's you're right. I was that up until about 2 months ago.
So how were you balancing that life? Because you started off, I think you were fifth year, were you? When
fifth
you
year,
Pillars?
yeah. So 2 years I did Pillars, 2 years in medical school. Well, not really 2 years. It was a few months in fifth year, and then as a doctor for 2 years. So I've been practicing.
How were you balancing both of those lives? Because so many people come and ask me, they're like, oh, when should I leave my job? And like, I think the truth is you can build a successful startup, or the beginnings of it, whilst you're doing your full-time job. So how did you balance that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you should jump out of your job straight away. Unless you've got a huge VC backing or investments. And even then there's a debate about whether that's the best thing to do. But as a medical student, it was a lot easier. I think people who go to university don't realize how much time they really have on their hands. Obviously, exam periods can be busy, but generally speaking, you have a lot of time. So it was much easier when I was in medical school. And honestly, it was evenings and weekends is really the main time. Even you could, like, I wasn't probably... I often left a lot of my studying until nearer to exam time. So
we all did.
Yeah, I think that was another aspect, if I'm brutally honest about it. And then obviously when exams come back, almost everything kind of has to stop and you kind of work on it. But managed to make that work. And then as a doctor, that was when it was really tough. I won't lie, because at least when I was a medical student, I had some sort of routine. Like I would do work like between Fajr and going like lectures or during the day, because your timetable is so flexible, everything's recorded now. You can almost decide to work during the day and then do your lectures at night. You can kind of move things around. And then when I was a doctor, that wasn't an option. My shift patterns was changing constantly. I was day, then sometimes twilight, which is like evening work, then night, and then back to day. So you're constantly trying to figure things out. You're often catching up on sleep when you're on days off. So it was a lot harder, to be honest, to get that same progress. But honestly, it's just about, like, you use the small pockets of time you have. So when you're on the tube or commuting, you're on your phone answering Slack messages. When you're just using every single, if you're waiting for something, you're on your phone, like a lot of that sort of work.
It's a real trial by fire, because I feel like if you didn't care about it so much, you just wouldn't find the time. Is the thing. But if it really mattered to you, you can make it work. Like you're saying, you're doing it. You're using your commuting time. You're staying up after Fajr and working there and moving things around. But it got to a point where you felt like, okay, now I can go full time. What was that trigger point for you?
Two things. I would say partially of where I am in my medical career. So people might not know, but when you leave medical school in the UK, you do 2 years of foundational training. And that's like your basis, and you get registration during that time. And then after that, you do your specializing. So I'd done that. So I'm fully registered. I'd done 2 years. And then now I had essentially an option. Do I want to, it's what they call an F3, which isn't a formal term, but it's a year where you decide to basically you can do a lot of different things. You can go work in Australia, New Zealand. You can decide to do what they call locuming, which is where you work as a kind of filling up gaps in a hospital's rota. You can do fellowship jobs. You can do research, whatever. Like, it's kind of almost like a gap year for medics, right? So this is like a perfect opportunity. I know some people did management consultancy for a year or two, and then go back into medicine or stay there, depending.
I know someone who went to work in a hedge fund and he never went back.
You get all sorts, right? The more typical stuff's locuming and like New Zealand and Australia, but you do get the management consultant. I know a few guys who did that for a year or two and then came back. So it was a natural time where it doesn't disrupt my kind of, if you want to call it, the flow. And that's why I decided to do it now. I would say a lot of people do F3s, but not a lot of people do it doing startups. That's not very common. There are some really good
outside
examples.
of the medtech space.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Unrelated to medicine.
That's true. That's actually very true. I haven't thought about it in that way.
Yeah, because we went through the Techstars Accelerator in our group, and also the cohort beneath, and what subsequently after that. Without fail, there's always a couple of doctors doing something in the medtech or pharma tech or whatever you call it type sphere, but very rarely do you find a doctor who's doing something outside of that.
I'll be honest, I've thought about it. If I didn't have something that alhamdulillah has done well, like Allah's put this in my hands, like I'm kind of in Allah's service of doing something with pillars. You don't just like get given something like that and just throw it away to do something else. But if I hadn't, then I would probably work on a medtech related idea. I think long term, I'd love to do it, because if I've got my interest in like product and tech, product design tech, and I've got my skills there. The other obviously big skill that I have is I've gone through medical school. I practiced as a doctor for a few years. So I've got the ability to bring those two skills and use them in one place. So I would love to do it down the line. I think I would love to, I feel like the things that I'm really interested in working on right now are like, what I'd like to consider infrastructural, like key things that Muslims have to have built. Like if it's not me, someone else needs to do it kind of things. And I've got like 2 or 3 of those ideas. And once I've done those, I want to be able to hone the medical go back and do something medical tech related down the line.
Can you share those ideas?
So one of them is Jibreel. I can share that. So pillars is one. So I got like 3 ideas. I once tweeted, I was like 3 like squares and one's pillars. The other one is now Jibreel, which I've announced, and the third one is unannounced.
Okay.
But Jibreel, I'm happy to talk about completely. The other one's like unformed, so I don't really have much to talk about. But it's to be fair, it is in the financial space, but I'm actually keen on seeing, I think you yourself and there's a few other people who are in this space that I think are doing interesting stuff, and I don't know where everyone's going to end up being, but I think actually there's a good chance that by the time I get there, someone's done it and worked it out. But essentially it's like building wealth for the Muslim community and helping make money work well for Muslims, I think is the general overarching idea. Yeah, I think, but Jibreel, I think is like kind of my next focus. I don't think I can work on 3 things at the same time. Jibreel is essentially the Duolingo for fiqh is kind of how I'm giving the one-liner that we get told to say in startup world. So the idea is that fiqh, fard ayn, every Muslim should be knowing their fard ayn. There's no exceptions. It's something you have to do. You have to be able to know how to pray. You have to know how to do wudu. You have to know how to do how you fast, etc., etc. And unfortunately, there's loads of courses around. Mosques deliver these sessions. There's online courses that you can do. But unfortunately, most people don't have time for it. You could argue that people should make time for it, but the reality is people don't make time for it. And part of that is because unlike things like languages, where we've got really interesting tools now, like Rosetta Stone was a really early innovator in the space. Duolingo, there's a few other, I think Babbel's another one that people like a lot. They've all kind of decided, okay, there's obviously classrooms that you can learn languages in, but people like to do like bite-sized learning, make it flexible, work around them, 5 to 10 minutes a day sort of thing, fun, really interactive. But the Islamic education space hasn't done that. It's just stayed in it. And I think for partially good reason, partially you don't want to commoditize Islamic knowledge because it can get quite dangerous very quickly. But what we thought is, you know what, there is a basic level of Islam that every Muslim should have easy access to. You can't become a Spanish whiz through Duolingo. Like you can learn the basics, you can maybe speak it at a basic level. You're not going to become a professor at university through Duolingo. You're going to have to go through some very advanced linguistics. Same thing with fiqh. If you want to learn the basics, then maybe you can learn that through a Duolingo for fiqh approach. But if you want to become more advanced, you need to go to a scholar. You need to go through an Islamic institution. So what we want to do is 5-10 minutes a day. You go on to Jibreel. I'm actually building this with my brother Abdullah, who's also a doctor. And we're just trying to basically make it so that 5-10 minutes a day, you learn a little chunk of your fard ayn, and over a 90, 100-day period, short period of time, you should be able to basically know all of it. And your basics, just to be clear, there's obviously a lot more to do.
It sounds very similar to, we had Shanaz Nawaz.
Oh, Gaida,
from
or
Gaida.
Nia
The Nia app now, where he was super inspired by Duolingo. His whole thing was helping Muslims increase their relationship with the Quran. Most of us can read. A lot of us can't understand the actual Arabic and don't really have that real relationship with what is meant to be the criterion and the actual guidance for our life. So he's building that kind of like 10-minute sessions and quizzes. So is it kind of like that, but for the fiqh element? Yeah,
so we're both in the Islamic edtech space. I think that's clear. But I think, they're really focusing on that connection aspect and really taking I don't want to speak on behalf of him, but essentially taking Quran and like deriving lessons and kind of creating a relationship between you and the Quran, very creative ways. And we're focusing on I think you would argue they're doing more of a tazkiyah tasawwuf kind of, you could say, like more of an Islamic Quran reflection approach, much more about the spiritual connection. Whereas I think, which is extremely key, we're focused on the kind of outer fiqh, which is more the I guess the more ritualistic aspects of Islam, but both are super key. You can't have one without the other. Actually, I remember one of my teachers saying, like, if you have one without the other, it's basically one of those things that you have to balance very carefully.
For sure.
You need the spiritual with the outer aspect. So I see both of these tools as being extremely vital.
Really interesting. I'm really looking forward to that.
So people think we're competitors, but I don't think
I don't think so. I don't see it. I see you as kind of working in the same kind of space.
Absolutely.
The same thing. Definitely collaborate.
And I do know Shanaz, and I get on with him very well.
Okay, no, absolutely. I want to, again, wind back a little, because everything that you're saying to me screams serial entrepreneur, and that you kind of had this entrepreneurship bug.
Inshallah, but I think we're a bit off that.
No. But what I mean is, as a kid, you're a doctor, your brother's a doctor. Did you want to be a doctor growing up, or did you always, I don't know, was there something in your childhood, or did you see a parent who was very entrepreneurial that pushed you to doing what you're doing now, quite young?
It's a very passionate topic of mine. So no, the short answer is I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I think a lot of people actually are in that bucket. A lot of people go to university kind of just to buy time.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend today who actually said that to me about their brother, that they're just kind of doing whatever just to buy time. The reality is that my parents, specifically my dad, was really keen on me becoming a doctor. And that was more, I would say, a cultural aspect, in the sense that back home, I mean, I'm half Palestinian, half Iraqi, but...
Oh, you're half Iraqi, no way.
Yeah, half Palestinian, half Iraqi, yeah. So but a lot of my family are in Jordan, Palestinian side of my family. And in places like Jordan, but across the Middle East, the way they rank people is basically on their percentage. Their GCSEs, it's like a percentage number they get given. And if the ones who score the highest, all of them just like get picked up and put into medical school.
Really?
It's literally like that.
Oh, okay.
And then and it's like the top ones are doing medicine and engineering. That's it. It's like a blanket rule. It's not that we're gonna need some like very smart bankers and very smart engineers and very smart medics and very smart lawyers. No, it's just literally we'll take whatever the smartest kids are and put them in medical school. So, and that comes from an aspect of like in society, at least in my parents' day, the people who are driving the nicest cars, nicest houses, the most well off are usually the doctors in society. I think that's changed quite a lot now, at least in the UK it has. And so, yeah, I essentially had this kind of pathway where I was, alhamdulillah, doing well academically. I can get into medical school if I try and work hard towards it. If I get the grades, I'm doing well enough. And I kind of, at that point, literally just was like, I don't know what else I'm going to do. I don't have a specific passion for anything else. My dad's very keen on me going down this direction. So I'm just kind of going to go with it. Like, I don't have a reason to say no. Like, it's not like I'm super passionate about something else and I can go do that. The only thing I'd say to that is that when I was younger, or just generally, I've always had like an interest in tech, IT and stuff like that. That's always been an interest. But I never saw computer science. Like I don't even remember conceiving the idea of being a engineer. Like that wasn't a passionate thing. And I don't know if that's an element of all my family and friends being doctors. Every time we went over to people, I guess the only thing, you almost don't know that you're like, I don't want to say brainwashed because that's an unfair statement, but you almost don't realize.
You're surrounded by what's perceived as comfortable or safe.
Yeah, people like kids, like when you see what kids want to do, they often want to do what their dad does, like, right? Like when they're really young. It's just, you're a product of your social environment.
And this is what really gets me, because I really feel like for most people, if you grow up in and around London, everyone kind of gravitates towards financial services because that's how traditionally people have made money in this part of the world. My family, my father, everyone around me was in financial services.
Really?
So I just assumed I
didn't
was going to end up in that kind of space. So I went to university. I went to UCL as well for my undergrad.
Nice.
I did physics. And the only reason I did physics is that I really wanted to do zoology. But my parents were like, there's no way. You have to go into something in financial services, working in a bank or so something like that. So it's like there's like a normal track record from people who do either econ or physics or a certain other thing, and they could see me doing that and applying to somewhere like Deloitte, which is where I ended up. But when I look at my family in the Bay Area, this is coming on to what just happened recently with MTF. They are entirely about, okay, how do I get into something in big tech and or entrepreneurship? I feel like every single Muslim there has some sort of side hustle or is thinking about it. And it's just such a difference between the Muslims there versus the Muslims here. What I think here, I think it's partly a consequence of, I think, financial backgrounds as well. Whereas the Muslims here are kind of first or second, sometimes third generation. A lot of them didn't come from very wealthy backgrounds either. So their parents just sort of do something which is financially quite safe and secure. Don't rock the boat, don't do something entrepreneurial. Whereas over there, I think the Muslims sometimes are like first or second gen, but they were a lot more educated when they went to America. Their parents had more money, and as a consequence, they feel they can take more risks. I don't know. That's been my take on it.
Yeah, I've had discussions and like watched or listened to discussions about this. I mean, when you say over there, do you mean the US or specifically the Bay Area?
I mean Bay Area.
Okay, because Bay Area is a bubble, right? Okay. For sure. I don't think you can extrapolate that across the US, although there is an element of difference between US and UK. Bay Area is not. It's not just the Muslim thing. It's like everyone in the Bay Area is like it's cracked basically is the word we'd use, right? Everyone there is like, everyone you meet is working at a big tech company and building something on the side, or they're building something they're building something that's already been funded. It's kind of like you're either in one pot or the other.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing very crazy, interesting things. Everyone's got this. Even if you're working at a big company, everyone's goal is most people's goal, I would like to say, is to eventually go build their own startup.
Sure.
And why is that? It's kind of the same as actually what I was saying with the doctor, like being surrounded with doctors in family and friends like spheres, is that everyone around there is doing that. Like you go out every single dinner or lunch you go out to, everyone's doing something. Yeah. So what are you going to do? Just carry on your pathway? You just feel uneasy at doing that. And that's where I think I've noticed something that it sounds really simple in conclusion, but we are really very much social creatures, social like humans. And creatures is not a good word to use actually, but essentially we want to feel comfortable. We want to be surrounded we want to be accepted by the people around us.
Yeah, you want to fit in.
Yeah, and I notice even in the Bay Area, a lot of people, they're not even doing things for money. They're doing things for clout, for prestige. And it's to get acceptance from the community around them. It's actually very interesting. Like I used to think it was all a money thing. I think it partially is a big time, but also people want to earn respect from the community that's around them. If they consider them all very prestigious, they want to be able to say, I built something very, very impressive, and that everyone around me like is impressed by it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the same, and it's the same in the medical world. Like, why do a lot of parents want their kids to be doctors? Because at least from the parents' perspective, they consider their children being doctors as a very prestigious thing.
Yes.
Right? When they want to go to family gatherings or go to Eid events or Ramadan events, to be able to say, oh, my kids are both in medical school, doctors, it's very obviously a very prestigious thing. So I think it's interesting. And that's what I think I've been trying to expose, because you're right, in the UK, I think we're very much in the kind of either the financial space or the medical space, like pharmacy, medicine, dentistry. And we don't have a strong representation, but it's changing, of Muslims in tech. And I think that's something that if we want to be able to have people kids in sixth form think, I want to be an engineer at a big tech company, or I want to build my own startup, then the first thing you have to do is have examples of those successes and surround them by it. I think that's the absolute first priority. And so I guess to get to that point, the most important thing you have to do is start bringing Muslims together. Yeah. And you have to start to kind of almost radicalize them in the sense of take them to the Bay Area, get them to understand what it's like to be in the Bay Area, realize that everyone's doing something very interesting, everyone's building very interesting startups, and then bring them back to the UK. And then they start to look around and going, why is the UK, or why is the scene here so slow?
Yeah.
Why is no building? And they almost start to get, it's an infectious feeling. And it sounds very cringe, I can tell, just like talking about it, like it's they've obviously got their problems there, but I think generally speaking, it's something, there's a very, and we can talk about this because I think abundance mindset, all of that is some of the big takeaways that a lot of, because we did the trip there recently, and a lot of the things that people who are in the house with me and on the trip with me said to me is this idea of abundance mindset, that there is, that everyone can have. So I think...
So let's just for people who don't know, Muslimic Makers ran something called Muslim Tech Fest. It took place here in London back in June, but they also went to San Francisco last month, just in September at the time of filming. And a few people, Abdul Rahman and a few other people who we know, all went out there together. They stayed in houses together. They went and visited some of the biggest companies from Apple, Google, YouTube, and also met a lot of founders out in the Bay Area, all who were Muslim or Muslim aligned in some way. So that's kind of the comparison we're making here. But yeah, just coming back to that, you mentioned abundance mindset.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of jumping on topic.
Yeah, that's all right. This is great.
Right. So one of the big takeaways that people had going to the Bay Area, I'd been last year, so I kind of got this realization last year, but for a lot of people, this was the first time. That they have an abundance mindset. Now, that's what you use for kind of the non-Muslim or non-Islamic term, but I guess for us, abundance mindset is risk, that there's unlimited risk, that Allah has unlimited risk and can give everyone everything if he wanted to, right? In the US, or at least in the Bay Area, they have this mindset that if you're successful, I can also be successful. And it's not that the pie is limited and everyone's taking a bit of a limited pie. It's that there's loads of pies. Like if you've discovered this pie, great, I'm going to go discover another pie over there. We're not talking about slices. We're talking about everyone owning their own pie. And in the UK, and I think we can talk about the reasons why this might exist, there's a scarcity mindset. And I think, by the way, I think that's generally the UK mindset. And I think Muslims exacerbate it even more, is really? The way that I would put it. Yeah, I think one of the things that people in the UK generally don't really go outside the box. Everyone's kind of quite structured, I would say. And I think that's one of the reasons why Europe and UK has lagged behind a little bit by the Bay Area. Even the startups that people work on are probably not as progressive in terms of what the kind of scales they want to achieve.
So what you're saying is that Muslims in UK and Europe don't want to help each other. They feel like if someone else is doing better, then I'm going to be doing worse.
Yeah,
as a result.
It's like, and if I climb the ladder, I'm going to put it up behind me because there's something at the top that I don't want anyone else to have, because if they get it, then I'm going to get less of it. This idea, this mindset exists in the UK generally, but Muslims in particular, and I think that's partially because of a lot of us or our parents were immigrants. There's a lot of scarcity mindset in the sense that there's a limited amount to go around. And one thing that the Bay Area definitely showed is that actually, no, there's enough for everyone. If you're doing really well, then please teach me because I want to do really well. And what you find is people are willing to teach. They don't hold back. They don't gatekeep. They're really willing to teach. And I think the biggest irony of all of this is that we Muslims are the ones with the scarcity mindset, whereas there's so many non-Muslims who have this abundance mindset. And that's why I made that link between abundance and rizq, is because if you think about it very carefully, when you act or think that there's a limited amount of resources available to you, you're actually suggesting that Allah only has a limited amount to give. And so if you think about it in that way, you could I don't want to say it's kufr, but you can almost start to go into dangerous territory.
Yeah, you can.
Where you start to think that Allah can't give everyone anything. And we know as Muslims that there's no limit on what Allah can give to someone. Allah can make everyone very wealthy. Allah can make everyone very poor. But there isn't a limit on it. So the idea that if someone takes, that detracts from you taking, is very much a non-Islamic mindset. And it's very unfortunate that us Muslims have the scarcity mindset and those others, non-Muslims, have the abundance mindset, which is the more Islamic mindset. So I think that's something I'd really love for the Muslim community to take away. And I think this trip was really great in the sense that we had people from all these different institutions, from Wahid, from Islamic Finance Guru, from these different startups, engineers at leading companies, some that had been building startups, some that had already exited their startups, like a couple of them who'd gone through Y Combinator. Very, very, mashallah, very big range, very smart Muslims.
Very accomplished.
Who could hopefully kind of almost be like a delegation where they can come back to the UK and kind of like reset this mindset of like, actually, we all can lift each other up.
I'm so hopeful for it because we're seeing the amazing work being done by Ibrahim over at Dean Developers and, Zahid and Arfa with Muslimic Makers and what they're doing with Muslim Tech Fest. It feels like there's more cohesion than I've ever, at least in my lifetime, than I've seen before within the kind of, I don't know how you describe it, Muslim tech entrepreneurial type space. Do you think as well, one of the questions that came in from someone at Kestrl, do you think there's a difference between the brothers versus the sisters within the space right now? Do you think, I don't know, one is doing better than the other? That I don't know, from what you've seen.
I think a lot of sisters feel a little bit isolated from some of the progress. I want to say we made a huge amount of progress, but there's obviously progress. And you mentioned MTF. I think MTF has been a game changer in the space. I was with Zahid earlier today. Mashallah, Muslim Tech Fest, just in its function of bringing people together, let alone what the actual event provides, is a huge value add for the community.
Sure.
I think there's that aspect, but I think, I'll give you an example that comes to my head, is that when we did the house, the Bay Area house, when we went to SF, obviously it was brothers only. And I had people saying, what about the sisters' house? I think it's a difficult one, but it's not something I'd love for there to be a sisters house, but it's difficult for, let's
It's not
say,
something that you can.
I'll organise.
Yeah.
But there was actually one, like Home Club did.
Did they?
Yeah, they did a sisters house. It was
it
obviously a
Romero who
smaller
did it?
number. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And it was a smaller number of people, but it existed. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly what might be causing this issue. I think that there are leaders in the space like Arthur from Islamic Makers
She'll be coming on, yeah.
who are doing a lot of good. So it's not like we're lacking Muslim female leaders in the tech space. But yeah, and I think tech's actually potentially a great space for a lot of our sisters, I would say.
Very interesting.
For a lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to summarize, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes Muslim founders make?
So I would say not talking to their users sooner is a big one. Spending ages on their first version. I don't think it's just one thing, unfortunately. I think people just get really caught up in the idea that their first version has to be a super polished, finished product. And they don't just think, like, I take it back to the Pillars launch example, is that literally almost like create an artificial limit for yourself. Say that I have to have a V1, a minimal viable product of the product that I want to build within this weekend. Like these 2 days, that's it. I don't have more time than that. And that will force you to basically start to think much simpler. Because the issue is that what people end up doing is they come and they say, I'm non-technical, but I've got this idea. And I want to find a co-founder for this idea. And they spend ages trying to find a co-founder, or what unfortunately also happens is they spend loads of money paying developers to build that product for them. They haven't spoken to users. It's just a concept in their head that they're building out. They haven't shared that on social media to get feedback from that, which is also talking to users if you really just boil it down. So there's none of this validation process. Whereas what you find again, go back to the US thing about like, again, I was one of those people where I would try and keep ideas to myself and then not realize. And by the way, I was one of those people who did these things. Like I went through, I learned it the hard way, right? Of like, I'd build something out, then realized that this wasn't something that people really wanted. So what you realize in the Bay Area is that people almost like tell people their idea and then like almost ask them, tell me like what's wrong with it. Tell me, am I working on something stupid or not? Like almost like in a very frank way. And people will give the feedback back in a very honest and brutal way. Whereas here, I think I would say people are much more, they want to be polite. They might say, or they, I think often it's the conversation's not even being had, like let alone what the feedback is.
Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create an auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast. So basically there's a scarcity mindset which is stopping people from sharing their ideas openly because they're afraid of it, someone taking it and stealing it. There's also, I think, maybe an element of pride mixed with embarrassment that, okay, I don't want to tell anyone this too early because if it's crap, then people are going to, come after me and make fun of me and
I
all
can
of
see
that.
Yeah.
So I've been there myself as well, right? With the early days, we were too afraid to tell people because we were like, oh, what if someone's going to steal this, which is crazy within fintech and financial services because the amount of barriers to entry with all the licenses that you need and the costs of development, ideas are literally a dime a dozen. There's very few people who are executing. So yeah, it's probably a mix of those two things. And then, like you said, coming back to the point about having leaders within the space, we don't have too many well-known Muslim tech leaders, that we can look at. As I
think that's a big one.
Yeah.
I didn't usually. Yeah, I think you boiled it down really well. It's like Not enough people are building true MVPs. Not enough people are building in public, like, or talking to users. Not enough people are, unfortunately, as you say, thinking like, do I want, like, they're worried about sharing it. They're worried about people essentially like failure, like worry of failure. I think all of these things are extremely valid.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, we've talked about a lot. I want to come back to pillars, and because we mentioned, okay, some people are afraid of finding a co-founder, but it's Tariq, isn't it, who you co-founded?
Yeah. So I started with Tariq.
Yeah.
Me and Tariq were working on it for about a year. 2
And you
years.
were friends, were you already?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say we were like we weren't best friends, but we were friends. We knew each other across campus.
Okay, you're like the ISOC or...
Yeah, I struggled to remember when I first met Tariq. It might have been an ISOC or an Arab Society event, one of the two. It was quite early in first year.
Fine.
Because we were I think we were in the same years, if I'm not mistaken. Like we were same age, just different courses. He was doing mathematical computation, I was doing medicine, and we kind of aligned in the way that we think. We said to each other, let's work on something one day. We were both somewhat entrepreneurial in that.
So you were having those conversations anyway?
Yeah, but very loose. I think it was when the Muslim Pro scandal had happened, then that was the point where we said, this is now an excuse to work together. Like, this is a great idea to work on together.
And Tariq, he was doing software engineering.
Mathematical computation, I think is the course name, yeah.
He was very clearly the tech founder.
He was, but even the stuff that he did for Pillars was self-taught, because in their course, from what he told me, was very much corporate-based, and like the languages you're learning, the frameworks you're learning are all for corporate world, as opposed to how to build a B2C consumer app.
What do you say to people who advise not to work with your friends or to found a company with your friends?
Well, I'll take it further. I'm working on Jibreel with my brother. So you could look. I think there's absolute valid truths to this.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to. I should say, by the way, that me and Tariq ended up going a different way.
Is he not at Pillars now?
He's not at Pillars anymore. Not any like issues or anything.
No.
We're still on very good terms. We talk regularly.
Yeah.
So now my co-founder is Omar. Who, funnily enough, like, Twitter has actually done wonders for me. A lot of the team that currently work on Pillars, a lot of my co-founder now, Omar, co-founder, CTO of Pillars, both of us, we met on Twitter, like, through DMs.
No way.
So he's based in the US, and now it's me and him. But just to clarify that point. But yeah, you asked me whether it's a good idea to work with friends and family as well. I think all the concerns are absolutely valid. I think basically, going into the working with my brother, I basically said to him, look, you're obviously my brother at the end of the day. We're going to treat each other as siblings, but we can't use that as our fallback. Like, we can't say, oh, if we have issues, we'll work it out. Like, because
then it turns into, I'm big brother, you're little brother.
Not even just that. It just becomes really messy. Like, let's say, like, things often get messy when things start to go well.
Yeah.
So let's say things go really, really well. Then you start to say, like, this is the equity that, like, if you just put everything as verbal agreement and you don't mention things, you just work on it. So I said to him, look, let's just deal with it as if we weren't brothers. Like, what would you do? You would have a co-founder agreement. You would set out the terms. You'd have the vesting period and all the amount of equity, without getting technical, the amount of equity that everyone's getting, et cetera, the roles, like the titles, all of that. Let's work it out as if I'm working with a stranger. And then we get on with it. And then obviously, let's say there is let's say down the line, God forbid, there is a conflict that occurs. First of all, you have those things that can hopefully help deal with things. And on top of that, you have the benefit of being siblings, if that makes sense.
Of course.
But what a lot of people do is they unfortunately don't have those agreements in place. They'll work on something as friends or siblings, and that it will get to a point, it does really well, and then everyone now wants a piece of their pie, and then one person's arguing that I've done more work, et cetera, and it becomes messy. Why? Because you don't have anything written in black and white that agrees it. So it's awkward. It's definitely an awkward conversation to have with friends and family, but it avoids so much headache down the line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we went through it as well. I founded Kestrl with my friend from I did an MBA, so dying. We met whilst we were studying there at Cambridge, and the third co-founder was actually my dad, which introduced like a really kind of weird dynamic, because it's like, you know,
and you're kind of 2 versus 1, right? You say there's 3.
No, it's often, yeah, there's 3 co-founders, but often what happens is that it's me and dying trying to push something, and my dad is
really?
the wall at the top, because he's the CFO. so he controls all the money. So what often happens is I have a big idea, I'm trying to get money for it, and my dad's like, absolutely not. I need to see, the ROI, what's the customer acquisition cost, what's the LTV, I need to do this financial model, okay, tweak it again, let's do this. And then dying almost ends up sort of mediating. So that's the kind of what the dynamic that's worked out. But similar to you, we said early on, we're just going to do this the YC recommended way, which is everyone has an equal share of equity. We vest this over a certain period. We have bad leaver clauses. So if someone tries to do something and they try and leave, there's a way of clawing back their equity, and if they go against certain things. So yeah, I think I'm in a similar position to you. I think it's a good thing if you set up the basics well.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned YC. There's also seed legals. They have like a co-founder agreement. So there's like draft documents that you can just very cheaply get and sign.
Yeah, you don't need to pay a lawyer thousands of pounds for this.
You really don't. And I think those are extremely important things to have. And people don't tend to do that, I think, to avoid the stress and headache. But it's so easy to just do it, and it will avoid a lot of headache down the line.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So in terms of pillars, Jibreel, I've always wanted to ask, there was a big debate that raged in the London Muslim Tech Bros group maybe a few weeks ago about should you be VC backed versus should you bootstrap or something in between. At Kestrl, we've so far gotten away with angel investing and some angel syndicates who came on board. We had Wahid Ventures and we went through an accelerator, Techstars, as well, but we haven't gone down the full VC route. I was very much leaning towards the bootstrapping versus, angels as opposed to VC. We had Shanaz on episode 12 of the podcast, and Shanaz is full blown. I think the clip, the viral clip of what he said was, if you want to make an impact with your startup, you have to be VC backed.
That VC is the best route if ultimately you want to build the biggest company possible at the greatest scale with the greatest level of impact.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, so this is where me and Shanaz have had healthy debates, both on that group chat, but also in person, actually. At MTF, actually. We went into a room and we just hashed it out for like an hour. And I think Demi from Wahid has just sat there, being a VC himself, just looking from left to right as we kind of whacked it back and forth. I think the honest answer is that there's probably no single right answer. This is the boring answer that everyone wants to, but there's probably no single answer that's correct.
Sure.
If you're a very building a health tech or fintech company, assuming that you've done basic stuff to validate the idea, and eventually to actually make that idea work, you need licenses and regulatory approval, etc. Everyone knows that stuff takes time. Everyone knows that stuff takes a lot of money. There's no chance you can do those things bootstrapped at a certain point, right?
For sure.
You can maybe, you will know this better than me, but if you're in the fintech space, rather than getting your own banking license, like I think Revolut's an example, they only recently got their banking license as far as I know.
Yep.
They were using someone else's banking license. So you can get as big as someone like Revolut going through just not hijacking, but like on top of someone else's banking license. So there are ways of trying to reduce costs and get to market quickly to avoid that. I think Monzo's another one. They were Mondo, I think at the time they did prepaid cards rather than current accounts.
All the big digital banks today, they all went through that. They borrowed an electronic money license from a third party.
Yeah.
That just meant they could get cards out there. Hugely unprofitable. It's very hard to turn a profit on that. And they used that as a way of acquiring their own banking license. But of course, each of those were VC backed because there was no other way.
And I assume they were validated. They were doing it to validate the idea as well.
Yes, to validate the idea for sure.
To get there quickly.
I think it's easier when you're someone like Tom Blomfield, who off the back of Starling, and he'd done Go Cardless and all that. He went out to the market with an idea for Mondo as it was, and I think raised 10 million in a weekend just on the back of an idea and a quick pitch deck.
It's the power of being a second founder.
Yeah, for sure. And having the network. Absolutely. So I think for a fintech, I can see the appeal. Shanaz has kind of swayed me a little bit towards the VC, and that, okay, if you want to make a bigger impact as quickly as possible, VC could be the way. Your personal take, would you ever accept VC funding?
Yeah, so I think there are some spaces where if I was to build a tech space, maybe I would, because it would be necessary to be even able to validate the idea, assuming that I can't validate it without money. If I'm in a space where, like, a lot of people ask me, like, did you get funding to build pillars? I was like, why? Because I had the design skills, the marketing skills, and now I would have the coding skills. we kind of can do it all in house. So what's other than like the human capital,
and plus the marketing maybe.
But marketing, as I said, we don't spend much on marketing, if anything. So it's like quite limited. It's just mainly social media management and videos, but no paid marketing like at that scale.
Okay.
So bearing that caveat in mind that there are startups, I accept that VC is kind of critical for them to even be functional. I think there is a lot of startups, a lot of them that could have been done with, I think there's an aspect of they could have done with just one round of funding. Like they could have just got early funding, seed, pre-seed stage, got that funding, and then just focused on the product. Because that gives you the core team time to basically figure out the MVP, validate it, get the product in front of customers. And then they don't necessarily need to go through further rounds, but they kind of almost go into a snowball situation where the investors want them to do a next round because it means that they're progressing.
And you're playing the valuation game. So,
there's valuation, and like every 18 months, you're kind of expected to kind of show that there's progress in it.
Sure.
So there's that element of it. I personally think that in a space like ours, VC is not necessarily in our best interest. Partially because it's Islamic space, and I don't think there's that many established VCs.
Not too many.
That are good, really good VCs that will help open doors up in the first place, because there's not that many Muslim VCs out there, and B, be able to actually support us in the way that we need them to.
Sure.
There's also the element of like, why do we need the money if we can turn a profit really early on? Like I just don't get the idea of like, I find a lot of, honestly, when I see some VCs back startups, it's almost laughable, to be honest. Like the valuations they're getting are really ridiculous.
I know.
And I personally think that a lot of them, it almost feels like a huge bubble. And I don't know if I like that approach.
Okay.
I like that. All right. So I think the way that when I spoke to Shanaz, this is what we kind of got it down to.
You're being very diplomatic about saying basically no.
But basically, there's two ways to think about it.
Yeah.
Shanaz and VC world say growth.
Yes.
I don't want this to bite me in the back in case I do end up raising VC down the line. Because I do think there's a place for it. I just don't know if it's necessary for a lot of startups to end up doing it.
Sure.
But there's growth. And the way that it works is VC money comes in. It allows us to pump money into the growth bit. And then after we've kind of got validation, grown the product, got loads of users, then we start to worry about profitability. Good example is Uber, right?
Yeah.
Unprofitable for a very long time, and was basically trying to just get more and more users, own the market, because they knew it was going to be a monopoly situation at the end. And then once they got that, then they decided, okay, now how do we figure out the business model? Other side of it is, and I think this is the more, I would like to say, more traditional way, and I think the safer way of doing it is to just grow within your means, basically. Figure out profitability, get a product that people like, people pay for, and then use the money from the business and pump it into the startup and just get it essentially to grow. So you do profitability first, then growth, whereas VC world is growth and then profitability. Now, the reason I say that there's a kind of element, there's a middle where you can maybe raise money on the very early stages and then not raise again, is because I've described that the money is needed for growth, but actually there's a slightly earlier phase where it's just figuring out what you're doing, like what is the problem you're working on, building out the solution for it, validating that solution. So there's like a kind of earlier product validation stage, and you need money for the team to actually be able to work on that full time. But I would argue someone like me has done that in their free time whilst doing a full-time job.
I think we can, using Kestrl versus Pillars as case studies for it. At Kestrl, we could do all the Figmas, we could do all of that, but to actually validate the idea and actually take on deposits and things, we needed some money. So we raised a small pre-seed round from 3 angels, around 150K is what we raised, and that enabled us to actually build out a prototype, put it out there, get in 1,000 real users and start testing. But there wasn't really another way of testing unless we had that money to pay for the license and pay.
So that makes sense. Early stage.
But with you guys at Pillars, you could build stuff basically in your free time, and the beauty of it is that you're not restricted by a license.
Yeah, we don't have it's not a regulated space. We don't have issues with like, the only time that you might want to pay someone is for skills that you didn't have in-house, but we had all the skills in-house. We need external developers to get the MVP out. And now, like, I mean, even just 2-3 years on since we launched, now you can use AI tools, etc., to help you build things much more quickly, even if you're quite a basic developer or even non-code for certain ideas. So like the excuse for being able to raise money is actually getting lower, because the even people are saying the idea of the concept of an MVP is dead, because you could argue that you can build pretty polished products now within, that time frame that I said, one weekend. Maybe 2-3 years ago, one weekend could only get you a certain, like a janky website with not very nice UI, does a very basic functionality. Now you can get really polished. You've got Tailwind, you can get very polished UI, you can get very nice functionality in the same weekend, in that same time frame. That's why I like the time frame concept, because I think that's better than saying, oh, it's got to be a Google Sheets. No, just time frame it, put it into a box. I'm interested, what did Shanaz persuade you by? What did he say that made you think?
His whole thing was about, did you want to start a business to basically be a lifestyle business? A lifestyle business being, okay, it's going to make decent money, maybe $500,000 a year, maybe it'll hit $1 million a year, you'll be able to draw a decent salary, your team will be able to, and it will just run and run and run, but it may not necessarily make kind of global
and
impact.
Cap out at that?
It will cap out, right, at some point, because you'll hit a plateau where without an additional injection of capital, you won't be able to reach new markets, new geographies. Maybe a license will restrict you, something like that. And his take on it personally was that Allah had given him this opportunity to make as big an impact as possible, as global an impact as possible. And he had reached a realization where he wasn't going to be able to get there by bootstrapping. And if he wanted to get there as quickly as possible, execute as timely as possible and as effectively as possible, he needed millions to come in. And the quickest way to do that was through VC. Added to that is, of course, the provisos that he was from VC himself.
I'd say.
I know, okay. So he's from VC. He worked in an edtech VC.
Yeah.
When he went out to raise,
he was funding startups like his own.
Exactly. And that network that he'd built made it very, very easy, I'd say comparatively, for him to raise, as opposed to someone who didn't have that network, maybe was straight out of uni, had never spoken or been in the vicinity of a VC before, some sort of investor. So I think there's a little bit of that at play. From my perspective at Kestrl, it kind of swayed me a little bit, because I just thought there will be a point where we're hitting a plateau. So at Kestrl, for people who don't know, we launched a consumer app first. We did that. We had a few tens of thousands of customers, but we never figured out monetization within the app. As we were thinking of ideas for that, an Islamic bank from Malaysia, Bank Islam, reached out to us and said, we like what you're doing. Can you white label this tech and give it to us? And suddenly that took us into a whole different business model, which was business to business, B2B, software as a service, where we went from being on our knees and having like 2.5 months of runway left, and I wasn't taking a salary for like months and all of that just to pay the developers, to suddenly being profitable, month-to-month profitable. And I think for the last 2 years, we've focused on pitching to banks who want to better serve Muslim communities. So we now work with many banks in Malaysia, UAE. We were just out in Saudi, Pakistan as well. But what I've been thinking about recently is that it's not why I started Kestrl. Why I started Kestrl was so I could help out people in my community, in the Western world, people who do not have financial services tailored to their faiths, but people who feel like they have to compromise just to live and to exist in this world, whether it's building a credit score with a credit card or living in a house that you don't own, so you've had to take out conventional mortgage. That's why I started it. And then talking to Shanaz, I thought, okay, the real way we can do this, and look at every other fintech that's been there, with the exception of maybe PensionBee, but we can talk about that. Every other fintech has raised venture capital in order to make a huge impact within their geography and then expand out globally. So that's kind of what swayed.
I disagree with a lot of it.
Okay.
The only thing I could maybe slightly agree with is the fact that it helps do it faster. But this idea that there's a cap doesn't make sense to me at all. And I'll tell you why. I mean, you said the money is needed.
Yeah.
But what's the function of the money? How's that money being spent to get to global markets? Why can't you do, if you build a product that people really want, with the rise of social media, it's very easy to get global access. It's not like you're having to physically move into those markets to do, at least for things like apps like we're building. It's not difficult for you to do that. Why? The only thing I would argue is that you can do it faster potentially. But I'm actually of the philosophy that even paid marketing is actually probably not a great thing.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Products that speak for themselves, organic growth, all of that is much, much better approach to growth.
But if you wanted to say Kestrl wanted to launch in the US, we'd have to go through various mechanisms to get a license on the ground before people could actually.
As a fintech, you would. But take Guide or Ania. What's the regulatory?
Sure.
Okay, let's use them as an example, since that's he did that as a VC.
Shanaz, I know you're watching this, so we'll have to get you back on to defend yourself.
So I'm trying to understand, what is it that they can't do through like your normal organic means, like
Yeah.
building profitability early. With the caveat that they might have needed that to be able to to build the initial products, you might
Sure.
need some capital.
Sure.
But beyond that, I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. I feel like, but I'm trying to think, what would you do for a startup that's not fintech, that's not medtech? Those are the two ones that
Human capital. What about human capital? What if you don't have the people who are experts within? I don't know. Not everyone's amazing at Twitter or X. Not everyone's amazing at TikTok or Instagram, right? So bringing someone in, maybe you don't need to raise millions to do that.
I think if you're an entrepreneur, you got to be scrappy and you've got to be good. Or if you're not good, learn to become uncomfortable with doing those things. Like no one's really good at Twitter until they try to do a Twitter, you know, like I've
been trying for 4 years, so please follow me if you'd like to.
You just got to put yourself in those positions. Like you know this, like entrepreneurs, like you do things that you just don't expect to do. You have to be uncomfortable standing in front of, I don't know, a mosque or whatever, giving out leaflets and talking to people. And fairs are a really good example of this, where you have to stop people and get their attention. So like the idea that you just want to throw money to someone else to do the job is not, I don't think, cuts it. I think fundamentally it's just speed. Like that's honestly the only thing that I can think of that actually makes sense. It gives you some flexibility in the sense that you may be able to offer your product for free or for a low cost, where you can make a loss for a longer period of time to dominate a market. So there are some scenarios where, for example, like Uber, where you might argue actually getting first mover advantage is actually more relevant.
So what if Shanaz was here and he said, well, listen, we heard about this new app that's coming out called Jibreel, and we're a little bit worried that they might be a competitor in the space.
But the irony
so
is
we want to hit, all of the US
and
France.
Okay, well, assuming we're not competitors, which I'd like to think we're not, especially in this space, to be honest. Even if we were building the exact same thing, I wouldn't consider him a competitor.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, you're doing something that helps the community, right?
Yeah.
So if you put it in that way, you still like, okay, I mean, I'm building Jibreel. He's building Nia, and Nia is VC backed.
Yes.
Has started years before, at least 2 years. I think roughly a year or two.
2022.
Yeah. So roughly 2 years, and they are VC backed. So they're already 2 years ahead in terms of the start date and VC backed. And we're starting Jibreel, and we're not VC backed. We're bootstrapping. So I think that's just I don't think the bigger threat, at least in this market, again, might not be able to talk about Uber and stuff. In this market is actually getting the products right and people liking the product. I think that's the
No, I agree. I mean, look at Kestrl, we didn't raise VC money. There were people who started at the same time as us who did. They raised crazy sums of money. Sometimes when I think, okay, if someone had given us that, we could have taken over like the world. But those people, they failed, I think, to execute that well.
I think VC money does that sometimes to you as well.
You think so?
Yeah, 100%. I think VC. I've seen people get VC money and just get so distracted because the money ends up coming into the bank. They have first of all, they have so much money that they can essentially execute on any idea that they come up with. There's a real chance of losing focus of what they want to do. I think there's a huge element of you lose your creativity.
And you become comfortable. I think that's the thing.
Comfortable, I was going to say that. And then I thought, actually, you could argue VC money makes you uncomfortable. Like, at least from my perspective, as long as you're fearful that you're doing, because as a Muslim, obviously, and generally a good person, you want to make sure that you're trying to build something in good faith with your investors, right? You're not using their money recklessly.
Of course.
So I would argue that having the money in the bank could make you uncomfortable in the sense that you need to then show investors in 18 months' time. There's not a deadline that you need to show progress.
It can make you uncomfortable in that way, but you can become uncomfortable not having the money and that you don't know how you're going to provide for your family sometimes.
That's
I have to make this work.
Yeah,
the hunger. It's like, I don't know if you watch UFC or something, right? But people say that Conor McGregor was never the same as he is now compared to how he was in his early days because the hunger's gone. Right? He's a multi-millionaire. What does he have to fight for anymore? So maybe that's the comparison. There's so much more we can talk about, but we are completely out of time. So
we need a VC
we need to do a part 2, or maybe we get in Shanaz as well. We get you guys to debate. I think that would be really good. Before we close, I know you have a special announcement that you'd like to make regarding the Pillars app. So please, the mic is yours.
Yeah. So no, I appreciate that. Alhamdulillah. So Pillars, obviously, we've been running for a few years now, building the prayer app that people know and hopefully love. What we realize is that there's a lot of things that people want from Pillars beyond what we offer already There are things that loads of different problems that people face in the day-to-day life that we think that we can solve. So alhamdulillah, what we're doing is we're now building out a suite of features, and we're going to be packaging that up into the Pillars premium subscription. And inshallah, what that will do is allow people to hopefully support us, because what we want to do is, as much as we'd love to offer things for free for everyone, what we really need is a world-class team that can build a product that is excellent and work on it full time, so that they can find problems in the Muslim community and build for them. And it's very difficult to do that when people are doing other full-time jobs, and we want to build a full-time team that can work on these things and be able to essentially build world-class solutions for important problems in our community. And so we're going to do the subscription that will hopefully allow people to support us and benefit from those solutions. So we've got loads of things coming, like Apple Watch support, we've got Alexa device support, things like that, widgets, in-app additional times, prayer notifications, reminders, that it's like calendar sync with Google Calendar. There's so many things. People don't realize this, but we've been listening to them a lot over the last few years. We have like feature requests every single day, and we've basically looked at them, organized the top 20 things that people want, and we're building it out. So I'm really excited for that, because I think everyone's going to love it, and just purely by the fact that they've been asking for it for so long. And I think that inshallah that will allow us to make Pillars into a company that can serve our needs a lot better, and do that long term. Because something I notice is that when people build these startups on the side as opposed to full time, is that they often die out, because everyone gets busy with life, with family. So it has to be our full time focus, and that's why we're doing it. So yeah, inshallah,
amazing.
we'll be launching that soon.
Really looking forward to it. Hopefully it will be out by the time that this is released. So
Inshallah.
if it is, go check it out. All right. Abdul Rahman, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.